Hello, recording started, lady. You sound really happy about that. And hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sprint demo presentation for Sprint 23 for the PWA studio team, consisting more and more of contributions from Magento Community Engineering. Thanks very much. Today on the docket, I think we have, I'm still sharing Chrome, aren't I? Great. We have an agenda that looks roughly like this. We have payment methods for Venia and shipping methods for Venia that we're hoping that Paul and Jonathan at Bargreen will be able to show us when they can attend. Their tardiness is entirely our fault, as we had not forwarded them the new meeting invitation. So we might shuffle the schedule around to get going. The second on the docket is the subject of the product slider component for Venia, which in this case is a story that is currently marked in progress. There's been some general slowdown, I think, this sprint, largely due to absence or travel or just personal stuff. But we do have at least some progress and some conversation to have on the product slider story. So I will turn it over now to Art. I will turn off my screen share. Art, you had some thoughts or some questions about this product slider component story, doing the implementation of the component.
Yep. Okay. Second. Yep. Do you see? Wow. I will share my screen. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, awesome. Yep. I'm so here to open. So I started on visual component and find out that it's not like just only slider or, for example, new arrivals with slider feature, or even recommended for you with a slide scroll and so on. It's a global one. So I checked all designs that we have for now, and I found that it's only about what to show and how to behave with this. So, for example, I hope you see my screen. Recommended for you component has main image or some promotional image and some secondary images. New arrivals, almost the same. It's just images and how to show them by CSS and how to slide them by some JavaScript. Then related, which can be upsell, cross-sell, actually any slider, any content slider, scroller, and so on. Same with product image on a product view page with thumbnails, add them, and main image. Left alignment thumbnails and bottom alignment, it's a product view page. So question, suggestion, just what would you say if we will use one slider component that will include any type of components with some content? If we need to show the products, we will show just another component. For example, I will show you products where we have link, title, image, and so on. If you need to show the and so here will be slider as a main component with header. Sometimes we need it, and with the child's inside. So, and on a for example, homepage, we will call it like this: slider, then products. It's a testing content, and I hope it will. No, for now it won't work. So, yep, and it will look like this. So, if you need some component, here it is. Related products, upsell, cross-sell, any type of products. And on the home page, it will be like this. So products. So on the home page, we need slider, related products, title, and related. Done. That's it. Same with, okay, let's go back to homepage. Same with recommended foil styles under the development. So content as a stuff inside, and component slider, main slider component as actual slider stuff, how to show it. Yeah, that's actually it from my side.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late. Also very cool art.
Blue Jeans is great. Are you trying to talk? It says you're muted. Very cool, and thank you for your careful consideration of this. Are you proposing that we use, as part of the UX language of Venia, a different visual treatment for lists of products that are on a separate page, and different visual treatment between that list gallery of images and a gallery of images for the product detail page, or for any product rich component? I know this is kind of I didn't express that well. Are you proposing that we have in our UX language a distinction between the way that you browse a gallery of images for one product, and the way that you browse several products represented by their images?
Assuming that's a question for me.
Well, it's for art and it's for Salmia because it's a subject of discussion, but I'm trying to figure out whether this is a proposal for just one component or whether this is saying, here's how maybe Venia ought to distinguish them.
Let's hear what Art has to say first before I say anything. So Art, could you talk a little bit about your thought there?
Okay, let's go back to my idea was, as a developer, from time to time I need to show some content in some type of visual behavior. Particularly, let's talk about slider. So we have arrows and dots at the bottom of the slides, and content, what we will slide or scroll or whatever. For example, products. Products, image, title at the bottom, link, that's it. And I need to I need to use it in any place I want. Yeah, I would say like this. According to your design, it's just a styles.
Actually, there is a style, yes, but there is a very specific reason why it's designed that way, and I can explain that if you are done.
Yep, please.
Okay. So the thing is, browsing and decision making are two different points of the shopper journey. When I am browsing multiple products, right, when I'm still trying to figure out if I want to buy anything at all on this site, I need to be able to see more than one at a time because I want to feel efficient about the way that I'm browsing the catalog. On the product detail page, something has already captured my interest as a shopper, and I am there to figure out if that is the specific product I want, if the fabric quality, the way that it fits, the specifications on it, if that's something I want to purchase. So then my focus is on really examining that product versus quickly going through products to identify which one I'm interested in. That's why there is a different visual treatment on the home page and the PD page. It is, yes, stylistically different, but it's because it's catering to different behaviors at different points of the shopper journey.
That makes sense. So is the idea that the particulars of Art's several suggestions here would each be used specifically, and that would be normative, like it would be recommended in Venia if you are creating a new component which has a gallery thing, make sure not to use this and this visual indicator. Would we be writing this down and making this clear, or would we just
I think we could probably offer recommendations. I don't think that we can dictate how somebody wants to customize their site. In my mind, Venia provides a good educated standard on a shopping experience, and we can definitely reveal the reasons why. If we're saying we recommend that you use this type of carousel for this context, and here's why, someone may read that and agree with it and go that way, but they may also disagree with it and change it for their context. So I think that we have to be open to people doing what they think is right for their store. But I definitely would at least like to provide guidance on here's our reasoning for why we've set it up this way, or this page or this particular point in the shopper journey uses this as opposed to something else. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. So is there a deliverable there? Obviously not for you, you're making the component, but is there a deliverable there for us we haven't yet characterized?
Yes, potentially. Yeah, we're only starting to have these types of detailed discussions and examining these use cases now that we're seeing work in progress. Okay. So if Art, if you want to talk a bit more about this, we can take it offline, and I can schedule a call with you sometime this week whenever you're available at a time that works for you, and we can talk a little bit more. Because as I understand, you also want to make sure that the implementation is efficient, right? That you're not building a bunch of custom, like multiple ones, correct?
Yep, no problem. We can talk anytime.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'd like to hear from Jimmy too on this. So maybe, I don't know if there'll be a mutually convenient time for Art and Jimmy and myself during the first part of the day here. But maybe I can discuss with Jimmy later today, and then Art, you and I can talk, and then we can see where we land, and then we'll kind of decide on what the deliverable needs to be on our end in terms of describing behavior and suggested use and so on after that settling. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay.
So thank you for showing up, Bar Green, despite our total negligence in sending you invitations long ago.
No,
I
that's
had
fine.
not been aware that we've been relying on sending just URLs around to the four corners. So thank you for coming. Since you have just now seen the invite and the agenda therein, I would understand if you guys aren't actually ready to show the things that I put down, because I thought when I just copied a huge list of emails, you were on it and could review. So if you don't have the things that I put on that to show, that is fine. You can let me know. Or if you need me to rotate the schedule around, so we can have, for instance, Salmia would be a reasonable lead-in after this discussion with Art, and you could go after her instead. Let me know.
Okay, right now we just have a GIF of kind of the functionality. We don't have like a live demo or anything. We kind of scrambled together and just threw down a GIF to show you guys, and we posted that on the PWA channel. But we haven't actually had a chance to take a look at the requirements for this meeting, like what we're supposed to show off. So
yeah, we pretty much just posted a thing with the shipment and payment methods that we've been on.
Yeah, and like Art, you guys are free to discuss it in detail. A demo is ideally supposed to be a demo, and we all know that, but we're not going to be strict and just announce failure and do like Scrum ceremony about it. We can talk about it. Because, that's the reality of this. We all have kind of pieces of work that have value. So you guys showed off that GIF. I guess neither of you are in front of computers. I can do a screen share and we can pull that up.
Sure.
Because it's right there.
Yeah.
Let me take a look. My blue jeans is somewhere. They're going to have to change the name of this. And okay, can you guys, nope, I shared the wrong thing. And the Slack. So here we are. You guys want to narrate this?
Yeah. So right now we have the different selections. So what happens right now is you hit ship to, and then the get it by makes basically after ship to goes through, it makes another API call to that REST API to get the actual shipping methods.
Yeah.
And you can see that field filling out in real time. And so you can see it there, loading shipping methods. And then we have a selector for both the ship to and the pay with that will go into a new menu where you can see those options, select them, and then it'll emit that value back up.
Yeah, that covers pretty much it.
All right, fantastic. What's new here? Sorry?
Go ahead, no problem.
Well, I was going to say, what's new here specifically that you were planning on doing with implementation? You guys have, as you jumped into the projects, making things generic. For instance, this slider animation is something that could be genericized. There are other aspects of this and other affordances and bits of style that could be made generic. Do you guys want to talk about, and I'd like to make this more generally part of deliverables, what you think you are contributing as general purpose UI ideas, and then we can discuss them, however briefly, to see if they're something we want to standardize?
Yeah, so I think the big one's the selector, right?
Yeah,
but you go ahead and...
I mean, it's pretty much just a little button with a little arrow on it, right? I mean, what is it really?
The selector has a list of what are we calling them? There's a selector, and then there's the
list of sections.
The sections inside of it, and that's implementing CSS that was already there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that animation we were going to move to like the shared folder of Enya, because that's being used in like the actual full like get it by ship to menu, and then it's also being used in those submenus that show all the different options for like shipping methods and payment methods.
We have this shared folder, and I think that its purpose is not extremely well defined, but right now it serves as like half a staging area for things that might go into Peregrine and half things that really should stick to Venia, because what they are is implementations of the look and feel. So yeah, going in the shared folder is definitely a start, and maybe that's something we should formalize as well.
Yeah, and we should clarify the selector is a totally genericized component. So that's something that's actually going to show up in the what's the little UI that you can run where you can see
Oh, the storybook.
storybook. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's going to show up. That's like a storybook feature and everything. So
Yeah, it started there, then we just moved into Venya to figure out if it was super generic, which we think it is.
Between desktops, are you able to continue seeing Slack, or is it turning on and off for you?
It's going to like a blue screen, and then I think it's switching it, so we can't see it anymore.
Okay. Yeah. So sorry about that. I did not realize that was happening. Okay. One more question for you guys. As you're doing your implementations, are you referring to developer documentation? Are you reading code? Are you just writing your own stuff where it's not immediately obvious that hooks exist? Like, briefly, what's your experience of working against this API?
It's mostly been looking at how other parts of Venya implement similar functionality, and then kind of trying to take that as a base. Also, the Envision documentation. For this, it wasn't super as useful because there wasn't really a mock-up for it. But that's what we've been going off of.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just a couple of comments. So on your the very start of the GIF where you have the product detail page, the original design intent for that add to cart button is that it's sticky in the footer. So even if you're scrolling page content, that is always visible to you. That never leaves your site. I mean, it's basically the same as checkout or place order. So the user can expect to find calls to action or to go through the shopping journey in that area. That was one. The other thing is the get it by actually was intended to be a time estimate because people typically choose shipping method based on how quickly they want something. As I understand from Jimmy, we don't have the ability to fetch that, so we should probably change that label to say shipping method, and then when the actual values of the shipping method just offer an approximate, it might take this many, 2 to 5 business days, 7 to 10 or whatever, just as a model. Because the get it by and then showing a shipping method doesn't read very accurately.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, we're sort of just going off what the labels that were already there, but we can change those in our pull request.
Yeah, and I literally just found
so it's
out
more
about the fact that we can't get that time information at this minute. So there's no way you would have known that. So
for sure.
yeah, but it looks good.
Thank you.
Can I ask, is it just because of the Docker image, or what's your guys' New Zealand thing?
Oh, it's literally, that was like the fork of the Docker image I used. It just had it in a New Zealand currency, and we didn't change the environment variable. I thought it was kind of hilarious.
So Beverly, if you have some time after this, I would love to briefly chat, just like in Slack, about the Docker thing. I don't know if you caught my update.
Yeah, I looked into it a little bit, but yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing and share instead Outlook once again so that we can look briefly at what we have on the agenda. So thank you, Paul and John, for going. Oh, Jonathan, do you prefer Jonathan or John?
Jonathan's good.
Jonathan it is. Sorry about that. Paul and Jonathan. And now, Samya, we just mindful of time, we are running a little bit over. Would you like to continue by speaking about the UX design and components for Minicart that you've done?
Yes, it's going to be really quick, so I will try to get some time back.
We'll make up some time. Feel free to share your screen when I'm done. Unless you are not prepared to do that. Oh, there we go. Okay.
I'm prepared. So just to demonstrate, we've made some changes to the mini cart. And so you would access the mini cart using the cart icon. This would be the state. If you hadn't added anything yet, it would prompt you to shop. The thing that we had before was that you could swipe on an item to see more actions such as favoriting, editing, or removing the item from your cart. We decided to do away with that and instead we have this functionality that's it mimics the native Android, where you click on the three dots and it shows you kind of an overlay on the item, and it shows you options for that item. This method or this design or concept is much more scalable than the previous. If needed, we could add 2 or 3 more things to this and it would still be visible and tappable and all of that. So that's why we decided to go this route. I guess I'll hand it off to Jimothy. Now we both work together on, sorry, any questions on this?
Yeah, what does edit item actually do in this context?
What Magento Native does, it takes you back to the PD page, and what you would do is, let's say you've picked a pair of pants in black in a certain size, and then you suddenly decide, actually, I think I need to size down. It would add another item to your cart that is the new configuration. So you're not actually editing the item. You're adding a new item, so you would have to go back and remove the old one that you had. It's not ideal, but as I understand, this is how it works currently. So we just have to alert the user to say, hey, you have a duplicate of this item in your cart. Are you sure you want both? Or, maybe show them one on top of the other so you know immediately that you have 2 of the same. Something where we're not just trying to, pull the wool over their eyes and get an extra product conversion.
Yeah.
So that's what would happen. Would you like that context to be defined in the mocks?
I don't know. This isn't really something I've thought about too much, but no, that probably makes sense to have that defined, just because that does seem like a pretty significant kind of change than the user might expect.
Absolutely. We will put it in my UX backlog, and I'll tackle it when a couple of other priority items for the following sprint are done.
Yeah, I agree. That would be good to do. Sorry, hey, this is Misha, guys. I thought we might on the PDP page have an update option. Am I crazy? Did I make that up? Like once you go back and edit that, when you edit the item and it takes you to the product page, then you could. I thought there was a possibility to like update what you had in cart or add another item on top of that, but.
I was told that was not possible, but I may have not the latest information. If that's possible, we could definitely prompt the user to update their shopping cart once they change the configuration on an item that was previously in their cart. Maybe Misha, you and I could talk, and I could sketch out that flow based on what's the latest and greatest that is.
Sure, it should be easy enough to do. So let's do that.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's an API call, we can do it in the UI.
Awesome, thank you. Great question. Thank you for asking that and also reminding me of that use case. It had gone to the background a little bit with some of the other tasks. But the other kind of UX task this past sprint was I worked with James Kalkaben here, who's a tech writer, to do some usability testing on the new documentation that we're publishing for PWA. And I'll let him take over and kind of talk about what we did, the exercise.
So me and Soumya sat down with 2 third-party front-end developers. We asked them they had no previous PWA experience, and we asked them, what their background was and how they would go about learning how to work with PWA studios. And we kind of just observed how they used our doc site and what their thoughts were and what they were seeing on the screen. And from those observations, we came up with a few action items to improve the doc site and the content within it. Was there anything else to add?
So a couple of other things that I want to note here is that 2 data points is pretty slim. So what we're doing is we're expanding the usability testing to some more internal Magento developers who don't have as much familiarity with the PWA effort. But if any of you is interested, the thing is, if you've already had a look at the docs, that makes you a little bit of a, not a great fit for the study, because we want to get people's first impressions on it. But if you know of people that are interested in participating in this, external feedback is always, and we do offer compensation for usability studies. So if you have developer friends that you feel might be interested in doing this, please send them our way. You know where to find me on EngCom Slack. So That's one thing. The other thing is that these two developers were here as part of the Magento U training session this past month. And so one thing we're trying to gauge is what type of education we need to provide around PWA. So kind of got their thoughts a little bit on what sort of curriculum they would like to see for a PWA specific sort of training module, if you will. And so the hope is to kind of funnel that feedback to Vinay, who runs these Magento U sessions, and see if we can really tailor that content to what people are looking for. So that's the update.
All right. Thank you very much, Soumya. I think that qualifies as being movable to technical review. And there it goes. And the rest of the agenda is we talked about docs usability testing, I guess. And I think it's time for me to talk about middle tier reference architecture, which I don't have. I don't have a working example yet, which was a great disappointment to me, but as is my habit, I bit off a little more than I can chew. At the last sprint demo, I showed off, or I think maybe two ago, I showed off a brief description of a stateless and declarative domain-specific language for describing how application shell servers should behave. I have gone over that a little bit more. Unfortunately, I don't have a demo yet, and I will briefly share my screen to show you kind of what the task status is of this. Let me briefly push and I'll my middle tier reference architecture thing and then share my screen. So you can see here that as a developer, I want a platform agnostic approach to creating and deploying progressive web app storefronts. And this story builds upon a research spike where we thought about what a middle tier specification would be. Briefly put, the problem statement is as follows. Wait, tiered architecture or, oh no, I don't have the one that I wanted to have. Okay. The problem statement is as follows. I'll just say this. It's difficult for us to develop on Magento currently with progressive web apps because of the doubly linked connection between, I'm sorry, there's a little bit of crosstalk.
Somebody needs to mute.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Just a moment. I realize that I'm not sharing because I missed the button because that's super weird. Quickly, I will share my screen. Okay, can you guys see my desktop?
It's loading. Now we can.
The problem statement is as follows. The before on the left is actually a present situation, but we're speaking broadly of a transition that we're going to try to make. I have spent the last year talking about how in order to keep PWA Studio assertively simple, we want to make it a theme. It's a Magento theme. We talk about PWA themes, Venia is a theme. Thing about themes is that a Magento store owns a theme. It has a theme. And this isn't a UML graph that states that in a formal way, but those are ugly. This is trying to kind of demonstrate that the theme has to belong to the store just as much as the store belongs to the theme. In your environment file, you have to specify that there is a Magento backend domain that you use during development. This takes no effect during production, but effectively it means that during development, you have a very, very different architecture than you have in a deployed system. Development is through the browser, through a development server, which has doubly linked connections, where Magento 2 has to have a symlink back, and then it has to be configured to use your theme because it's serving the application shell. And not only is this difficult to set up, but it also makes it impossible to multicast or for several PWA development systems to use the same backing environment, which is the extremely efficient scenario that you get when you are working with a true SaaS application, which Magento is on the way to being. So the resolution to the problem statement is, again, sort of briefly, a specification for a domain-specific language. There's some problem with the table of contents here, but the idea of UPWARD or upward is that we can characterize the middle tier implementations in this after diagram using a domain-specific language which is platform independent, so that it's guaranteed to operate the same way on Node.js, on PHP, or on any other platform that you care to name. And the reason that we can do that is something I explain in the rationale section, where there's a sort of a concept of 12-factor methodology that applies to an application overall. And there is furthermore a concept of a progressive web app, which contains some facsimile of the data and the logic located in these backend stores. So there's a sort of a duplication here. There's an essential problem with progressive web apps where it's not just a caching layer. You want to go through logic, and you can cache logic in as much as it is declarative, but offline mode really requires a lot of thinking that we haven't completed. So the likeliest answer is that we'll end up with a tiered architecture, which is what most people and most systems end up implementing in order to solve this tension, where there is a place where the logic is centralized. It's just not very formal. It's like a little middle tier. And if for those of you who've worked in architectures that have a back end for front end, these things are prone to particular kind of degradations. And even in the Microsoft article that talks about backends for front ends, there are issues and considerations and worries. When only one interface is used to interact with the backend, or when interfaces make similar requests to the backend, you don't need to deploy different services for different user agents. And furthermore, if you have a gateway architecture, which is the one that's really depicted in that diagram, the gateway needs to be as stateless as possible and combine things in a way that is predictable. Otherwise, you'll end up introducing service coupling, which just makes your application architecture even more fragile. So the way to avoid this, in our opinion, and I say our and mean my, because I keep showing this to people and them going, I'm going to think about it. So it's in the early stages and has not yet passed through the architecture team's eyes because it needs a reference implementation and the test suite, which is further along than it used to be. The idea is to enforce a stateless middle tier by requiring that the application shell be something whose behavior is driven entirely by a single static file. This is not a programming language, this is configuration. And this configuration happens to describe in full a web server that serves articles and authors from a GraphQL service and then renders them against templates. It has a small bit of conditional logic in here that is pattern matching based on, these are regular expressions actually, based on the pattern matching systems you find in a lot of nice programming languages and people love. So what this enables is a middle tier that solves the gateway problem, but that does not allow you to get sort of arbitrary logic sort of stuck in here. You can if you really try by putting stuff in templates, but since the only default template engine that's supported is Mustache, that's especially hard to do. However, template engines can be supported arbitrarily, so we'll talk about that a bit later. The idea, again, is to push business logic to the edges of the system. Rather than having a gateway, which becomes a kind of an attractive nuisance, like if you put a half pipe in your front yard and then you complained about kids skateboarding in it, the law says that you made it too easy for them to skateboard in your front yard. A gateway is too easy to implement logic in. A YAML file is not. And what it does is it imposes a single unified graph by dint of the fact that it only supports GraphQL as its backing service. So this would have to exist in conjunction with increased GraphQL coverage, or in conjunction with service architecture that has GraphQL services that communicate with the Magento REST API backend. But in either case, you have a formalized contract with the Progressive Web App that allows it to be deployed as a separate application, and that requires you to duplicate data when it's necessary to duplicate logic when it's necessary to, and not to hide it in a bad place. A lot of people will say, oh no, another standard. I think there's an XKCD about this, as there is about everything. But we believe that this is, it's really the time for something like this. A couple of more examples. This is a file that echoes the entire request back to the client. The request is a standard type of object, which is fully documented down here. There's some description of execution scheduling. There's a description of progress through an example state machine that would show you how to do the lazy resolution and the lazy and maximally concurrent resolution that can get you maximum performance with this example. There is official behavior for cyclic dependencies, for window flush responses, and for the initial context that is delivered to every request. And the things that you can do are very limited, again, on purpose. You can put data in line. You can resolve from a local file, and a good implementation should have an injectable file system so that you can do this over a network if necessary. And that file is parsed with an arbitrary set of supported parsable syntaxes so that in the server side, you can do type checking against a compiled GraphQL query, for instance. There's a service resolver, which only works for GraphQL, that accepts a query, variables, and a little bit of metadata about the request itself. And then lastly, and the second to last, there is a template resolver, which by default must support mustache templates, which are aggressively logic-free. It should recursively resolve includes. And lastly, there is a conditional resolver, the only branch logic that exists, where you do pattern matching and then yields to resolvers in a use statement or a default statement. And that's enough. It's enough for the things that we need because the PWA has a really limited set of application shell behaviors that it needs. It really just needs to write a template out. A thing to understand about the template resolver is that arbitrary new template engines are supported. And one thing that allows and enables is the possibility of, say, server-side rendering of your React application. You can choose the borderline between the parts that the PWA generates, so that the upward app shell generates as text, and the parts that are rendered by React on the server. And you can implement it as simply as this example, where the engine that satisfies the upward contract is 4 lines. It just would require an upward service to be in Node.js. And rendering React as a string in other languages and platforms is an exercise left to the extremely unwise reader. For example, the idea, again, is to have a specification for this specific middle tier, one that works not just for Magento, but for the world at large, that might help us to avoid one of the biggest pitfalls that we can encounter when working with Magento. I've tried to make this thing really user-friendly. I've tried to make it possible to shorten documents until they're really, really readable and have a lot of type inference. And lastly, though this is not fully implemented yet, what I want you to be able to have at your disposal is the quick start, is a simple upward specification to run against your server. So if you have an upward server, as I do, that is still super buggy because that's not done, but the upward server is runnable via a shell script, then the contract for the test suite is that you present a shell script to it, and it's going to execute that shell script for every scenario in the test suite and deliver it the path to a YAML file supporting that scenario. We have a few, for instance, if your YAML is completely bad, then it should crash. If your YAML does not fully resolve to a legal response, like it doesn't have headers and a body, then it should crash informatively. And then if your YAML is legal, but it has no dependency on the request, then it should essentially create a static server. So again, no shame. My implementation is super broken right now, but I needed to finish up documentation. So this is still available here in the Upward branch, and there is an open pull request against it in the PWA Studio repository. So you can take a look and make comments on it if you like. That's kind of the appropriate place for it to go. Doop, 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 doop. So far, there aren't any comments, but probably because it says do not merge. That's all I got. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and I wish that there was a reference implementation to show you an integration with Webpack, but that's going to have to slide to the next sprint. Question?
No, dude, I think you're on the right track, but I would like to see a reference implementation.
Yeah, that's what I have going here. It's actually passing about 40% of the tests right now, but there's a lot of, I mean, I'm just kind of writing a spec and an implementation at the same time, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, that is the next step, and I'm not going to continue talking about this till we have a reference. So I will consider that story to be half passed, and we'll split it and then forward a story for finishing the reference implementation, the test suite, at which point I'd like to have a webinar about it where we can talk about it in more detail and field some questions.
For sure.
All right. So we have just a few minutes left, and we have just one item left on our agenda apart from Q&A, which is Jimmy showing us improved quality and testing for the checkout MVP. Jimmy, is that something you're ready to do?
Yeah. I mean, that's not going to be it's not going to be very complicated. So.
Love it. Complicated.
All right. Yeah. So basically, I spent the sprint writing tests for the Redux actions that have grown pretty rapidly as we've been developing features and had no tests. I had done a major refactor of actions, and we didn't have any test coverage, so we weren't sure whether anything had changed, whether any bugs might have been introduced. So in order to give us that kind of confidence, and also to show people how to write tests for actions, or at least one way of doing so, I wrote a bunch of tests. So basically that PR is here. It's basically just 1,000 lines of tests. And associated changes, to the code found during testing. So basically here under source, under actions, we've got our different slices of state: app, cart, checkout, and directory. We've now got files for actions and asynchronous actions. And then we've got tests for those. So for the simple stuff, so for just actions, which are basically the event types, right? We're kind of programmatically generating those with create actions, like we saw last week. These tests are very basic to write. You're basically just checking that when you call the function, that it actually returns the right type of payload here, which generally involves checking that if you pass a normal payload, it comes out in the shape you thought it would, and that if you pass an error, the payload is the error and it sets the error flag correctly. The other thing that we're testing, right, which will be true as long as we're using the create actions, is that the action creator function has a toString that is the same as the type field, which helps us avoid a bunch of syntax when we're doing this in reducers.
So the consequences of that's a little bit nice and magical, and it would be great if you would show off just in a console what that really means. Typically, if you toString an object, you get this string that says object, and that often shows up horribly in people's console logging when they're trying to do debugging. Maybe this is something everyone on the call is familiar with, but it's actually really nice. This is a developer experience feature that is
yeah, sure. So
significantly better than the prior experience.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you were to have, let's see, like if you're to say I'm gonna make a function here that's like Right, we've got a function here that does something. Right. We can actually change the toString of this to be, you know, like that, right? And now,
That's cool.
and so this is something that create actions does for us. So when we make actions in this way, we say, hey, you know, we're gonna make a bunch of actions for the app, you know, for the app slice, and one of them's gonna be toggle drawer. They're all gonna be prefixed with app. Then not only does this create a bunch of functions that helps us generate actions, but then when we come into the reducers part here, we import all the actions from the app slice here. And in the reducer, we can literally use those functions as the string of the type to handle, right? So that and that way, if the names, if the exact names of these actions change, it's not the end of the world, right? We're insulated from small changes like that breaking a bunch of stuff. So
Awesome. And this is another step towards the ability for others to inject actions into an existing PWA through an extension quickly and painlessly.
yeah, that's the big deal, right? Is that people are going to be making new actions and handling them in their own reducers and stuff, and so you know, it's got to be very predictable how things are going to be named. You know, as predictable as we can make it. Anyway, so those tests are easy to write, and then the other tests that are harder to write, you know, but now we've got a lot of examples, are async actions, and so let's actually go into something that's a little more complicated so that we can get a better look at it. So for checkout, right, we actually have requests we're making, right? So when we have some input, we submit that input, and then we get a response back from the API that either accepts or rejects. Likewise with order, we submit the order, and then the API tells us it's either accepted or rejects it. And then we've got some other more basic action types, like we begin the checkout, we're entering edit mode, reset checkout. So if we look at our async actions, we've got some basic ones like, hey, we're just beginning checkout, we're resetting it, etc. But then we've got the more complicated stuff for when we're submitting input, right? Where you know, we're dispatching actions that say, hey, we've begun to submit, and then we actually make the API call. We're formatting the address, right? There's a lot of stuff going on in these functions, and so that's why we had to test these. So if we go into test for those, right, we've got some, you know, we basically have to mock out the store so that we can spy on calls to dispatch and use the results of getstate. Which we're doing here, we mock the store basically, and then we also take the request call that we have from Peregrine, and we can spy on that as well. And then we set up some mock data, and basically before all the tests, we set up getstate, and then we're making sure that we're clearing our calls in between tests. And basically, we're checking for a few things. We're checking that these async actions, when called, should return a function, right, called a thunk. We're checking that the thunk is not returning stuff so people aren't using it in the wrong way, so that thunk has got to return undefined. And then we're checking basically that it's dispatching actions correctly. So when we call the thunk there with arguments the same way the store would, we're checking that dispatch has been called with the correct action, that it's been called the correct number of times. In a case like submit input, we're checking that on success, that we're getting the right response being passed through the action system to the reducer. We're not trying to test, since it's a unit test, we're not trying to test things recursively where we can. So sometimes we're just like, hey, we're doing other work, so don't test what's going on with the function being dispatched. And then we're basically checking that we've got the accept with response when it's successful, and that when it fails, right? So if we got a rejected value from request and it was this error, that the proper action was being fired here. And then we can also check that it throws in the where we expected it to throw. For example, if there wasn't a guest card ID and somehow you submitted an order, it should be throwing an error, right? And so all said and done, we've got almost 100% test coverage on these now. There's just a few more functions to test inside the card actions, but all the actions from app and checkout and directory are now 100% covered. And we have a way to go forward with future actions. I think that's it, really.
Thank you so much. So you can turn off your screen share, and we can stop the recording, provided nobody has any questions or comments for the floor. We've only gone 2 minutes over, which I think is fantastic. Paul, I'll be talking to you afterwards. Art, thank you so much. And for those of you attendants, thank you so much. Any other agenda items?
I don't think so. We'll get back to people, with more of the feedback that we had in the beginning of the meeting.
Yes. Folks, thank you very much for listening, and this will all be on YouTube, which will be pointless to hear if you're already watching it on YouTube. What is this? Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Yep. Thank